Hey guys, this is Test 34, Game 4. This is the Doctors and Clinics game. It is an incredibly difficult game, so if you had trouble with it, you're not alone. This is what I call a splitting game because we're taking the 6 doctors and we're assigning them to one of two groups, Ransborough or Sumerton, and both of these groups are present rather than in like an in-out game like the Birds in the Forest game or the Fruit Stand game. So we're going to basically try to link all of these rules together because they all contain conditional statements. All of them contain the word if, although for the first two rules, the if is in the middle of the sentence rather than in the beginning. So for that reason, don't be fooled. The first rule should be written as JS requires KR, not KR requires JS. Now we should immediately take the contrapositive of this rule so that we can more easily link things together. So the contrapositive of this rule, we could initially write it as, not KR requires not JS. However, if K is not at R, then where would it really be? It'd be at S. And if J is not at S, where would it really be? Well, it would be at R. So for that reason, we should instead write this rule as KS requires JR. The next rule says, if J is at R, then O is at S. Again, the if is in the middle, but the if indicates the sufficient condition. So this rule should be written as JR requires OS, contrapositive, OR requires JS. Now the next rule mentions L, N, and P, so we should skip that rule and come back to it when we can more easily link things together, at least we hope. The next rule says if N is at R, then O is at R. We've already got OR right on the beginning of the top chain, so we can simply add on NR at the front of that. So NR requires OR. Contrapositive, OS requires NS. Now the final rule here says if P is at R, then both K and O are at S. We've already got KS here, and KS already leads to OS. So this rule is actually a bit redundant. We could have simply said PR requires KS, and that would have been sufficient to communicate the same idea. We don't need to write down PR requires KS and also requires OS, like branching out another arrow from there. We've already got PR indirectly requiring OS by way of KS. So the contrapositive of this rule can simply be taken to mean KR requires PS. That is, again, sufficient to communicate that idea. Now the third rule, the rule that we skipped, says if L is at S, then both N and P are at R. So contrapositive, LS requires NR, so NS requires LR. LS requires PR, so PS requires LR. Now, you should notice something kind of strange about this. If you've watched my videos on Birds in the Forest or Fruit Stand or CDs games, any of those games, you'll see that the two chains are the contrapositives of each other, but they never actually link together. That's kind of impossible if they're linking in the beginning. Because, if you look at what LS is requiring, LS requires NR and requires NS. It requires OR and OS. LS even requires itself to be at LR, meaning L is being at S requires L to also be at R, going down either road here. How could L be in two places simultaneously when the initial paragraph of the game tells us that each doctor goes to exactly one of two clinics? Well, it's not possible. So what do you make of this? Because we didn't do anything wrong here. Everything we've linked together here is correct. This diagram is perfect. There are no problems with it. So what do we make of this strange impossibility? Well, we've got to identify what is causing the problem. Is LS causing the problem, or is LR causing the problem? LR doesn't require anything. There are no arrows stemming from LR. LR does not lead to anything and is not sufficient for anything. It's very easygoing. On the other hand, LS requires a ton of stuff, right? LS requires every doctor to be in both clinics simultaneously. It even requires itself to be in the other clinic. So LS is not easygoing. LS is very difficult. So LS is impossible. That is what we make of this. LS can never happen. Because LS requires impossible things, LS itself is impossible, and L must always be at R. So for this reason, we can make a little RS table, kind of like I make in-out tables for in-out games a lot of the time, and we can put L as always being in the R column. L is always at R. Now we can extract a few other little pieces of information from these chains. NR requires PS, and PR requires NS. Therefore, we can infer that neither N nor P can ever both be at R. At least one of those two variables must always be at S. We can never have both N and P at R. And the reason is, well, that's what LS was causing, and that's why LS was bad. LS was bad because it required both of these chains to occur in their entirety. So whenever we have a sub R arrow sub S relationship, again, sub R arrow sub S, at least one of the two must always be at S because the conditional relationship ends on a sub S. That's right, the conditional relationship finishes on an S relationship, kind of like with my positive arrow negative relationships for like a Birds in the Forest game. That means at least one of the two must always be out. So N/P in the S column. We can also make a new inference here, OR arrow JS, JR arrow OS. Again, we've got an R arrow S relationship, R arrow S relationship. At least one of those two must be at S. So I've inferred here that at least one of those two variables must always be at S. One of the NP pairing and one of the OJ pairing. So we will always have at least two variables at S at all times. This is our initial setup for the game. Next, number 19, a complete and accurate list of variables that could be at S. Well, the first thing we can do is eliminate any choice containing L, because we know L is always at R. So for that reason, scanning through the choices, choice C mentions L, therefore C is no good. We can also use the information that at least one of N or P must always be at S. Any choice lacking both N and P must be bad. Choice A lacks both N and P, so that is bad. Also, choice C lacks both N and P, so that is bad, although we have already eliminated that choice based on where L is. So we've exhausted the usefulness of that N/P at S. But we can also use the O/J at S knowledge to eliminate E, because E lacks both O and J. Now, we're down to B and D. We've kind of exhausted the things we've extracted from the chains. However, we're not done. If you look at D, N and O both at S. Of course, if you look at the chain, OS requires NS, so that seems fine. However, could those be the only two things at S? If they were the only two at S, then everything else would have to be at R, including, for example, K. And KR requires PS. So because choice E does not list P, it must be bad for that reason, and D is eliminated, leaving B by process of elimination. Next, number 20. If P is at R, what must be true? Well, we've got PR right here on the chain, and it leads to a lot of different things. So we can make a little RS table, if you like, to think about what happens as a result of P being at R. If P's at R, K's at S, we know J's at R, we know O's at S, and N is at S. And of course, L is always at R period, so that can go right there. Now when they ask us what must be true, we're simply going to run through the choices. J at R, yeah, we got it right there. A, we are good. KR, no, K's at S, of course. L at S never happens, period, from the main diagram. D, N at R, no, N is at S, as you can see right here. E, O at R, again, O is at S, as you can see right there. So A by elimination if you didn't get it before. Next, number 21, the minimum number of doctors that could be at Sumerton. Well, from our initial extraction from the chains, you see here, there's always at least 2 doctors at Sumerton. So for that reason, 0 and 1 can be eliminated. 2 is looking pretty good. And if you look at the 2 chains, you see that it is possible to have only two doctors at Sumerton, for example, JS and PS. And while these two chains are primarily useful simply as mappings of relationships, they also do happen to serve as valid scenarios. So we could have a world in which N, O, and K are at R, and then as well as L, of course, and then J and P at S, only two things at S. So C is good for that reason, and it's our answer. Next, number 22. If N and O are at different clinics, what must be true? So they don't tell us which one's at which, of course. We got to figure that out ourselves. Now, there are really only two ways this could happen, right? I mean, I'll make a little RS table. We could have N at R and O at S, or we could have a different scenario in which we have O at R and N at S. Now, only one of those two is actually possible, because OS requires NS, so this top possibility here could never actually happen. We'd have, if O was at S, they would both be at S, and that's not what the question's asking us for. Instead, we're looking at NS and OR. Now, NS leads to nothing except LR, which is actually a given, so that's not too powerful, but OR actually has a great impact. OR requires JS, KR, and PS. So I'm going to map those out down here. J at S, K at R, and P at S. So what must be true is simply, well, each of these 6 variables being placed in those different clinics. So what must be true? J at S, yep, we got it right there. A is our answer. I'll run through the others though. K at S, no K's at R. We've got P at R, no P's at S, so C is gone. 4 doctors at Sumerton, no, we have only 3 NJP. E for Ransborough, no, we've got 3 LK. So A by elimination if you didn't get it before. Next, 23, which pair of doctors cannot be the pair at Ransborough? Now, from our initial extraction of the rules, we actually already know the answer to this. We know N and P cannot both be at Ransborough, because at least one must be at Sumerton, and one of OJ must always be at Sumerton, so O and J cannot both be at Ransborough. So I would scan through the choices looking for one of these pairings, and you see N/P is right there in choice E as an echo of 23. N and P cannot both be at Ransborough. E is our answer. This is an initial inference based upon the idea that, LS cannot happen, and really because LS cannot happen because it requires NR and PR simultaneously right from the outset of the game. This is bad. We can't have both of those things happening at the same time. E is our answer. Number 24 is if K is at S, what must be true? Well, KS requires JR, OS, NS. I will draw another RS table out there for those of you guys who want to see me do that. We've got K at S, we've got J at R, we've got O at S, we've got N at S. Those are all the things that follow logically, and of course L is always at R from the outset. In this particular instance, P is on the fence. We don't know which way it is going. So for that reason, D and E can automatically be eliminated because we know P's placement is not determined. It is on the fence. It could go to R, it could go to S, it could go whichever way it wants to. It's not limited or determined by any other variable in this case. What must be true? Well, A, J at S? No, because J is at R right here. So A is eliminated. B, N at S. Yep, we got that right here. It followed from KS, JR, OS, NS. Right there, N at S is guaranteed. So B is our answer. Congratulations. C, O at R. Again, O is at S, not R. C is eliminated. B is our answer to this question.